Hello, I'm back. I am still a squirrel. All right, so we're gonna have one more segment. We're gonna do our last reading segment of October. One more Edgar Allan Poe story. It's a pretty good one. Of course, it is called The Premature Burial, and it is about being buried alive. So if that content is a little disturbing for anybody, that's okay. You can skip this segment. That's totally fine. But after this reading segment, I will go ahead and I will finish up streaming right out to somebody, and then Lady Liv and I will do some fun this afternoon, I think, before she does her evening Starfield stream. So let's go over to browser cam. We're going to be reading this off of. Whoop, that's chat. I don't know why it does that sometimes. It locks onto the wrong. Hello, chat. Hello, everybody. The rest of the stream is gonna be me reading chat with chat on the screen. Okay, let me switch over to the actual story. There we go. And this is the story we will be reading if you want to follow along on your own. Of course, I'll have it up on the screen. Let me make it a little bit bigger on the screen here also. You guys can see. There we go. So this is by Edgar Allan Poe in the year 1850. And I like this one. It's a little disturbing, but it's pretty neat. It is about being buried alive, though, so just as a heads up. It's a little bit longer than the other stories, but I should be able to finish it. Within... I'll try not to read too slow. I'm a bit of a slow reader, but we'll see. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with it. There are certain themes of which the interest is all-absorbing, but which are too entirely horrible for the purposes of legitimate fiction. These are mere romanticist These are the mere romanticist must eschew, if he do not wish to offend or disgust. They are with propriety handled in only when the severity of the majesty of truth sanctify and sustain them. We thrill, for example, with the most intense, pleasurable pain over the accounts of the passage. Thank you. Accounts of the passage of Beresina, of the earthquake of Lisbon, of the plague of London, of the massacre of St. Bartholomew, or of the stifling of the 123 prisoners in the black hole at Calcutta. But in these accounts, it is fact. It is the reality. It is the history which excites. As inventions, we should regard them with simple abhorrence. I have mentioned in some few of the more prominent and august calamities on record. But in these it is extent, not less than the character of the calamity, which so vividly impressed the fancy. I need not remind the reader that, from the long and weird catalogue of human miseries, I might have selected many individual instances more replete with essential suffering than any of these vast generalities of disaster. The true wretchedness, indeed, the ultimate woe, is particular, not diffuse. That the ghastly extremes of agony are endured by man the unit, and never by man the mass. For this let us thank a merciful God. To be buried while alive is, beyond question, the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen a lot of mere mortality. That is frequently, very frequently, so fallen will scarcely be denied those who think. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where one ends and the other begins? We know that there are diseases which occur total cessations of all apparent functions of vitality, yet in which these cessations are merely suspensions, properly so called. They are only temporary pauses in the incomprehensible mechanism. A certain period elapses, and some unseen, mysterious principle again sets in motion the magic pinions in the wizard wheels. The silver cord was not forever loosed, nor the golden bowl irreparably broken. But where, in the meantime, was the soul? Apart, however, from the inevitable conclusion, a priori, that such cases must produce such effects, that the well-known occurrence of such cases of suspended animation must naturally give rise, now and then, to premature interments. Apart from this consideration, we have the direct testimony of medical and ordinary experience to prove that a vast number of such interments have actually taken place. I might refer at once, if necessary, to 100 well-authenticated instances. One of the very remarkable character, and of which the circumstances may be fresh in the memory of some of my readers, occurred, not very long ago, in the neighboring city of Baltimore, where it occasioned that a painful, intense, wildly extended excitement. The wife of one of the most respectable citizens, a lawyer of eminence and a member of Congress, was seized with a sudden and unaccountable illness, which completely baffled the skill of her physicians. After such suffering, she died, or was supposed to die. No one suspected, indeed, or had any reason to suspect, that she was not actually dead. She presented all the ordinary appearances of death. The face assumed the usual pinched and sunken outline. The lips were of usual marble pallor. The eyes were lustless. There was no warmth. Pulsation had ceased. For 3 days the body was preserved unburied, during which it had acquired a stony rigidity. The funeral, in short, was hastened, on account of the rapid advance of what was supposed to be decomposition. The lady was deposited in her family vault, which for 3 subsequent years was undisturbed. At the expiration of this term, it was opened with the reception of our sarcophagus. But alas, how fearful a shock awaited the husband, who, personally, threw open the door. As its portal swung outwardly back, some white-apparelled object fell rattling within his arms. It was the skeleton of his wife, in her yet unmolded shroud. A careful investigation rendered it evident that she had revived within 2 days after her entombment, that her struggles within the coffin had caused it to fall from a ledge or shelf onto the floor, where it was so broken as to permit her escape. A lamp which had been accidentally left, full of oil, within the tomb, was found empty. It might have been exhausted, however, by evaporation. On the uttermost of the steps which led down to the dread chamber was a large fragment of the coffin, with which, it seemed, that she had endeavored to arrest attention by striking the iron door. While thus occupied, she probably swooned, or possibly died, through her sheer terror, and in failing, her shroud became entangled in some ironwork which projected interiorly. Thus she remained, and thus she rotted erect. In the year 1810, a case of living inhumation happened in France, attended with circumstances which go far to warrant the assertion that truth is, indeed, stranger than fiction. The heroine of the story was a Mademoiselle Victorine Lafourcade, a young girl of illustrious family, wealth, and of great personal beauty. Among her numerous suitors was Julien Bossuet, a poor literature or journalist of Paris. His talents for general amiability had recommended him to the notice of the heiress, by whom he seems to have been truly beloved. But her pride of birth decided her, finally, to reject him, and to wed a Monsieur Renel, a banker and diplomat of some eminence. Of some eminence. After marriage, however, this gentleman neglected and perhaps even more positively ill-treated her. Having passed with him some wretched years, she died. At least her condition so closely resembled death as to deceive anyone who saw her. She was buried, not in a vault, but in an ordinary grave in the village of her nativity. Filled with despair and still inflamed by the memory of a profound attachment, the lover journeys from the capital to the remote province in which the village lies, with the romantic purpose of disinterring the corpse and possessing himself of its luxuriant tresses. He reaches the grave. At midnight he unearths the coffin, opens it, and is in the act of detaching the hair, when he is arrested by the unclosing of the beloved eyes. In fact, the lady had been buried alive. Vitality had not altogether departed, and she was aroused by the caresses of her lover from the lethargy which had been mistaken for death. He bore her frantically to his lodgings in the village. He employed certain powerful restoratives suggested by no little medical learning. In fine, she revived. She recognized her preserver. She remained with him until, by slow degrees, she fully recovered her original health. Her woman's heart was not adamant, and this last lesson of love sufficed to soften it. She bestowed upon Bossuet. She returned no more to her husband, but, concealing him from her resurrection, she fled with her lover to America. 20 years afterward, the two returned to France, in the persuasion that time had so greatly altered the lady's appearance that her friends would be unable to recognize her. They were mistaken, however, at the first meeting. Monsieur Renel did actually recognize and make claim to his wife. This claim she resisted, and a judicial tribunal sustained her in her resistance, deciding that the peculiar circumstances, with the long lapse of years, had extinguished, not only equitably, but legally, the authority of the husband. The, how do you say that? Chirurgical Journal of Leipzig, a periodical of high authority and merit, which some American bookseller would do well to translate and republish, records in a late number a very distressing event of the character in question. An officer of artillery, a man of gigantic stature and robust health, being thrown from an unmanageable horse, received a very severe constitution upon the head, which rendered him insensible at once. The skull was slightly fractured, but no immediate danger was apprehended.
I like big men.
Thanks, MJ. Trepanning was accomplished successfully. He was bled, and many other of the ordinary means of relief were adopted. Gradually, however, he fell into a more and more hopeless state of stupor, and finally, it was thought that he died. Oh, by the way, trepanning, I looked that up. That has something to do with drilling a hole in the head to relieve pressure on the brain. So that's what that means. But it sounds like it was successful in this man's case. Terrifying, but gradually, however, he fell into a more and more hopeless state of stupor, and finally it was thought that he died. The weather was warm, and he was buried with indecent haste in one of the public cemeteries. The funeral took place on Thursday. On the Sunday following, the grounds of the cemetery were, as usual, much thronged with visitors, and about noon, an intense excitement was created by the declaration of a peasant that, while sitting upon the grave of the officer, had distinctly felt a commotion of the earth, as if occasioned by some struggling beneath. At first, little attention was paid to the man's asseveration, but his evident terror and the dogged obstinacy with which he persisted in his story had at length their natural effect upon the crowd. Spades were hurriedly procured, and the grave, which was shamefully shallow, was in a few minutes so far thrown open that the head of its occupant appeared. He was then seemingly dead, but he sat nearly erect within his coffin, the lid of which, in his furious struggles, he had partially uplifted. He was forthwith conveyed to the nearest hospital, and there pronounced to be still living, although in an asphytic condition. After some hours he was revived, recognized individuals of his acquaintance, and, in broken sentences, spoke of his agonies in the grave. From what he related, it was clear that he must have been conscious of life for more than an hour, while inhumed, before lapsing into insensibility. The grave was carelessly and loosely filled with exceedingly porous soil, and thus some air was necessarily admitted. He heard the footsteps of the crowd overhead, and endeavored to make himself heard in return. It was the tumult within the grounds of the cemetery, he said, which appeared to awaken him from a deep sleep. But no sooner was he awake than he became fully aware of the awful horrors of his position. This patient, it is recorded, was doing well and seemed to be in fair way of ultimate recovery, but fell a victim to the quackeries of medical experiment. The galvanic battery was applied, and he suddenly expired in one of those ecstatic paroxysms which occasionally it superinduces. The mention of galvanic battery, nonetheless, recalls to my memory a well-known and very extraordinary case in point, where its action proved to be the means of restoring to animation a young attorney of London, who had been interred for 2 days. This occurred in 1831, and created at the time a very profound sensation wherever it was made the subject of converse. The patient, Mr. Edward Stapleton, had died, apparently of typhus fever, accompanied with some anomalous symptoms which had excited the curiosity of his medical attendants. Upon his seeming decease, his friends were requested to sanction a post-mortem examination, but declined to permit it. As often happens, when such refusals are made, the practitioners resolved to disinter the body and dissect it at leisure, in private. Arrangements were easily effected with some of the numerous corpse of body snatchers, with which London abounds, and in the third night after the funeral, the supposed corpse was unearthed from a grave 8 feet deep and deposited in the opening chamber of one of the private hospitals. An incision of some extent had been actually made in the abdomen, when the fresh and undecayed appearance of the subject suggested an application of the battery. One experiment succeeded another, and the customary effects supervened. with nothing to characterize them in any respect, except, upon one or two occasions, a more than ordinary degree of lifelikeness in the convulsive action. It grew late. The day was about to dawn, and it was thought expedient, at length, to proceed at once to the dissection. A student, however, was especially desirous of testing a theory of his own, and insisted upon applying the battery to one of the pectoral muscles. A rough gash was made, and a wire hastily brought in contact, when the patient, with a hurried but quite unconvulsive movement, arose from the table, stepped into the middle of the floor, gazed about him uneasily for a few seconds, and then spoke. What he said was unintelligible, but the words were uttered. The syllabification was distinct. Having spoken, he fell heavily onto the floor. For some moments all were paralyzed with awe, but the urgency of the case restored them in their presence of mind. It was seen that Mr. Stapleton was alive, although in a swoon. Upon exhibition of ether, he was revived and was rapidly restored to health. And to the society of his friends, from whom, however, all knowledge of his resurrection was withheld, until a relapse was no longer to be apprehended. Their wonder, their rapturous astonishment, may be conceived. The most thrilling peculiarity of this incident, nevertheless, is involved in what Mr. S. himself asserts. He declares that at no period was he altogether insensible, that, dully and confusedly, he was aware of everything which happened to him, from the moment he was pronounced dead by his physicians to that which he fell swooning onto the floor of the hospital. "I am alive," were the uncomprehended words which, upon recognizing the locality of the dissecting room, he had endeavored, in his extremity, to utter. It were an easy matter to multiply such histories as these, but I forbear, for, indeed, we have need of no such to establish the fact that premature interments occur. When we reflect how very rarely, from the nature of our case, we have in our power to detect them, we must admit that they may frequently occur without our cognizance. Scarcely, in truth, is a graveyard ever encroached upon, for any purpose, to any great extent, that skeletons are not found in postures which suggest the most fearful of suspicions. Fearful indeed the suspicion, but more fearful the doom. It may be asserted without hesitation that no event is so terribly well adapted to inspire the supremeness of bodily and mental distress as a burial before death. The unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes from the damp earth, the clinging to the death garments, the rigid embrace of the narrow house, the blackness of the absolute night, the silence like a sea that overwhelms, the unseen but palpable presence of the conqueror worm. These things, with the thoughts of air and grass above, with memory of dear friends who would fly to save us if but informed of our fate, and with consciousness that of this fate they can never be informed, that our hopeless portion is that of the really dead. These considerations, I say, carry into the heart, which still palpitates, a degree of appalling and intolerable horror from which the most daring imagination must recoil. We know of nothing so agonizing upon earth. We can dream of nothing half so hideous in the realms of the uttermost hell. And thus all narratives upon the topic have an interest profound, an interest, nonetheless, which, through the sacred awe of the topic itself, very properly and very peculiarly depends upon our conviction to the truth of the matter narrated. What I have now to tell is of my own actual knowledge, of my own positive and personal experience. For several years, I had been subject to attacks of the singular disorder which physicians have agreed to term catalepsy, in default of a more definitive title. Although both immediate and predisposing causes, even the actual diagnosis of the disease is still mysterious, its obvious and apparent character is sufficiently well understood. Its variations seem to be chiefly of degree. Sometimes the patient lies for a day only, or even for a shorter period, in a species of exaggerated lethargy. He is senseless and externally motionless, but the pulsation of the heart is still faintly perceptible. Some traces of warmth remain, a slight color lingers within the center of the cheek, and, upon application of a mirror to the lips, we can detect a torpid, unequal, and vacillating action of the lungs. Then again, the duration of the trance is for weeks, even for months. While the closest scrutiny and the most rigorous medical tests fail to establish any material distinction between the state of the sufferer and what we conceive of absolute death. Very usually, he is saved from the premature internment solely by the knowledge of his friends that he has been previously subject to catalepsy, by the consequent suspicion excited, and, above all, by a non-appearance of decay. The advances of the malady are, luckily, gradual. The first manifestations, although marked, are unequivocal. The fits grow successively more and more distinctive, and endure each a longer term than the preceding. In this lies the principal security from inhumation. The unfortunate, whose first attack should be of the most extreme character, is occasionally seen, would almost inevitably be consigned alive to the tomb. My own case differed in no important particular from those mentioned in the medical books. Sometimes, without any apparent cause, I sank, little by little, into a condition of hemisyncope, or half-swoon, and in this condition, without pain, without ability to stir, or, strictly speaking, to think, but with a dull lethargic consciousness of life in the presence of those who surrounded my bed, I remained, until the end of the crisis of the disease restored me, suddenly, to perfect sensation. At other times I was quickly and impetuously smitten. I grew sick and numb and chilly and dizzy, and so fell prostrate at once. Then for weeks all was void and black and silent, and nothing became the universe. Total annihilation could be no more. From these latter attacks I awoke, however, with a gradation slow in proportion to the suddenness of the seizure. Just as the day dawns and the friendliness and houseless beggar who roams the streets throughout the long, desolate winter night. Just so tardily, just so wearily, just so cheerily came back the light of the soul to me. Apart from the tendency to trance, however, my general health appeared to be good, nor could I perceive that it was all affected by the one prevalent malady, unless, indeed, an idiosyncrasy in my ordinary sleep may be looked upon as superinduced. Upon waking from slumber, I could never gain at once through possession of my senses, and always remained for many minutes in such bewilderment and perplexity. The mental faculties in general, but the memory in especial, being a condition of absolute abeyance. In all that I endured, there was no physical suffering, but of moral distress and infinitude. My fancy grew charnel. I talked of worms, of tombs, of epitaphs. I was lost in the reveries of death, and the idea of premature burial held continual possession of my brain. The ghastly danger to which I was subjected haunted me day and night. In the former, the torture of meditation was excessive, in the latter, supreme. When the grim darkness overspread the earth, and then, with every horror of thought, I shook as the quivering plumes upon the hearse.
Here we go. Scaly time, baby.
Scaly time, baby. Ebony Fullbuster just resubscribed for 5 months. 5 months, woo Ebony smoosh.
Hey, Ebony, thank you so much for that resub. And welcome on in. I hope you're doing all right today, Ebony. Thank you so much. We are reading a scary story here about being buried alive. So if you're a little uncomfortable with that idea, look out. But this is a pretty cool little story by Edgar Allan Poe. So far, the story, he has gone over some historical accounts of being buried alive, and now the narrator is starting to tell his personal experience with being buried alive. And he has so far talked about how he has a condition where he occasionally gets very lethargic and sleeps for a long period of time in a sort of catatonic state. Oh yes, lurk, please lurk, or if you gotta go. Thank you for that resub, Ebony. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry that this is I'm sorry that the story is it's maybe not the best. But thank you for hopping in to say hi. I really appreciate you, Ebony. And guys, go check out Ebony. She's very funny. When I say funny, when she starts laughing about something, it's a very what do you call it? Like a very addictive laugh. Like we all kind of want to, when she starts laughing, it's very contagious, I guess is the term. And she's got a really cool looking avatar as well. Kind of a Hoshiko beast, kind of a bat-like, fuzzy, kind of just a creature. Very unique. I love it. She does have the infectious laughter. It's true. Like, look at her. Most of her clips are her something funny happens in the game, and she just starts bursting out laughing. And then, like, I start laughing because it's so funny. Like, yeah, the thing that happened was funny, but her laughter is very fun. So her streams are great. If you ever catch Ebony live, please check her out. I shush both of you. Well, all right, I'm gonna get back to reading. If you gotta go, understandable. I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable. This is spooky reading time. But yes, understandable if you gotta run. But thank you for hopping in to say hi. And we'll catch up. We will catch up, Ebony. All right, so let's get back to it. When grim darkness overspread the earth, and then, with every horror of thought, I shook as the quivering plumes upon the hearse. When nature could endure wakefulness no longer, it was with a struggle that I consented to sleep, for I shuddered to reflect that, upon waking, I might find myself the tenant of a grave. And when finally I sank into slumber, it was only to rush at once into a world of phantasms, above which the vast, sable, overshadowing wing hovered, predominant, the one sepulchral idea. From the innumerable images of gloom which thus oppressed me in dreams, I select for the record but a solitary vision. Methought I was immersed in a cataleptic trance of more than usual duration and profundity. Suddenly there came an icy hand upon my forehead, and an impatient gibbering voice whispered the word, "Arise," within my ear. I sat erect. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure of him who had aroused me. I could call to mind neither the period at which I had fallen into the trance, nor locality which I then lay. While I remained motionless and busied in the endeavors to collect my thought, the cold hand grasped me fiercely again by the wrist, shaking it petulantly, while the gibbering voice said again, "Arise, did I not bid thee arise?" "And who," I demanded, "art thou?" "I have no name in the regions in which I habit," replied the voice, mournfully. "I was mortal, but I am fiend. I was merciless, but am pitiful. Thou dost feel that I shudder. My teeth chatter as I speak, yet it is not with the chilliness of the night without end. But this hideousness is insufferable. How canst thou tranquilly sleep? I cannot rest for the cry of these great agonies. These sights are more than I can bear. Get thee up, come with me into the outer night, and let me unfold to thee these graves. Is this not a spectacle of woe? Behold!" I looked. The unseen figure, which still grasped me by the wrist, had caused to be thrown open the graves of all mankind, and from each issued the faint, phosphoric radiance of decay, so that I could see into the innermost recesses, in their view, the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn numbers with the worm. 1 second, I think I'm gonna shut the window. A lot of outside noises today. All right. Back to it. I could see in the innermost recesses, and there view the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. But alas, the real sleepers were fewer, by many millions, than those who slumbered not at all. And there was a feeble struggling, and there was a general sad unrest. And from the depths of the countless pits there came a melancholy rustling from the garments of the buried. And those who seemed tranquilly to repose, I saw that a vast number had changed, in greater or less degree, the rigid and uneasy position in which they had originally been entombed. And the voice again said to me as I gazed, is it not a pitiful sight? But before I could find words to reply... Sorry. Narrator. Before I could find the words to reply, the figure had ceased to grasp on my wrist. The phosphoric lights expired, and the graves were closed with a sudden violence, while from them arose a tumult of despairing cries, saying again, "Is it not, oh God, is it not a very pitiful sight?" Fantasies such as these, presenting themselves at night, extend their terrific influence far into my waking hours. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I fell prey to the perpetual horror. I hesitated to ride or to walk or to indulge in any exercise that would carry me from home. In fact, I no longer dared trust myself out of the immediate presence of those who were aware of my proneness to catalepsy, lest, falling into one of my usual fits, I would be buried before my real condition could be ascertained. I doubted the care, the fidelity of my dearest friends. I dreaded that, in some trance of more than customary duration, they might be prevailed upon to regard me as irrecoverable. I even went so far as to fear that, as I occasioned with much trouble, they might be glad to consider my very protracted attack a sufficient excuse for getting rid of me altogether. It was in vain they endeavored to reassure me by the most solemn promises. I exacted the most sacred oaths, but under no circumstances would they bury me until decomposition had so materially advanced as to render further preservation impossible. And even then my mortal terrors would listen to no reason, would accept no consolation. I entered into a series of elaborate precautions. Among other things, I had the family vault remodeled as to admit of being readily opened from within. The slightest pressure upon a long lever that extended far into the tomb would cause the iron portal to fly back. There were arrangements also for the free admission of air and light, and convenient receptacles for food and water, within the immediate reach of the coffin intended for my reception. This coffin was warmly and softly padded, and was provided with a lid fashioned upon principle of vault door, with the addition of springs so contrived the feeblest movement of the body would be sufficient to set it at liberty. Besides all this, there was suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell. The rope... Thank you, MJ. Besides all this, there was suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell, the rope of which it was designed should extend through a hole in the coffin, and so be fastened to one of the hands of the corpse. But alas, what avails the vigilance against the destiny of man? Not even these well-contrived securities sufficed to save me from the uttermost agonies of living inhumation, a wretch in these agonies foredoomed. There arrived an epoch, as so often before there had arrived, in which I found myself emerging from total unconsciousness into the first feeble and indefinite sense of existence. Slowly, with a tortoise gradation, approached the faint grey dawn of the physical day, of the cycle day, a torpid uneasiness, an apathetic endurance of dull pain. No care, no hope, no effort. Then, after a long interval, a ringing in the ears, and then, after a lapse still longer, a prickling or tingling sensation in the extremities. Then a seemingly eternal period of pleasurable quiescence, during which the awakening feelings are struggling into thought. Then a brief resinking into non-entity. Then a sudden recovery. At length the sight of quivering of an eyelid, and immediately thereupon an electric shock of terror, deadly and indefinite, which sends the blood in torrents from the temples to the heart. And now the first positive effort to think, and now the first endeavor to remember, and now in a partial and effervescent success. And now the memory has far regained its dominion, that, in some measure, I am cognizant of my state. I feel that I am not awaking from ordinary sleep. I recollect that I have been the subject to catalepsy, and now at last, as if by rush of an ocean, my shuddering spirit is overwhelmed by the one grim danger, by the one spectral and ever-prevalent idea. For some minutes after this fancy possessed me, I remained without motion, and why? I could not summon the courage to move. I dared not make an effort which was to satisfy me of my fate, and yet there was something at my heart which whispered me it was unsure. Despair, such as no other species of wretchedness ever calls into being. Despair alone urged me, after long irresolution, to uplift the heavy lids of my eyes. I uplifted them. It was dark. All dark. I knew that the fit was over. I knew that the crisis of my disorder had long passed. I knew that I had now fully recovered the use of my visual faculties, and yet it was dark. All dark. The intense and utter raylessness of the night that endureth forevermore. I endeavored to shriek, and my lips and parched tongue moved convulsively together in an attempt, but no voice issued from the cavernous lungs, which, oppressed as if by the weight of some incumbent mountain, gasped and palpitated with the heart at every elaborate and struggling inspiration. The movement of the jaws in effort to cry aloud showed me that they were bound up, as is usual with the dead. I felt, too, that I lay upon some hard substance, and by something similar to my sides were also closely compressed. So far I had not ventured to stir any of my limbs, but now I violently threw up my arms, which had been laying at length, with the wrists crossed. They struck a solid wooden substance, which extended above my person at an elevation of not more than 6 inches above my face. I could no longer doubt that I was reposed within a coffin at last. And now, amid all my infinite miseries, came the sweetly cherub of hope, for I thought of my precautions. I writhed, I made sporadic exertions to force open the lid. It would not move. I felt my wrists for the bell rope. It was not to be found. And now the comforter fled forever, and still a sterner despair reigned triumphant, for I could not help perceiving the absence of the paddings which I had so carefully prepared. And then, too, there came so suddenly to my nostrils the strong, peculiar odor of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not within the vault. I had fallen into a trance while absent from home, while among strangers, when or how I could not remember, and it was they who had buried me as a dog, nailed up in some common coffin, and thrust deep, deep and forever into some ordinary and nameless grave. As this awful conviction forced itself thus into my innermost chambers of my soul, I once again struggled to cry aloud. And this second endeavor I succeeded. A long, wild, continuous shriek or yell of agony resounded through the realms of the subterranean night. "Hello! Hello there!" said a gruff voice in reply. "What in the devil's the matter now?" said a second. "Get out of that!" said a third. "What do you mean by yowling that in there, that kind of style, like a cattymount?" said a fourth, and hereupon I was seized and shaken without ceremony for several minutes by a junto of very rough-looking individuals. They did not arouse me from my slumber, for I was wide awake when I screamed, but they restored me to the full possession of my memory. This adventure occurred near Richmond in Virginia. Accompanied by a friend, I had proceeded upon a gunning expedition some miles down the banks of the James River. Night approached, and we were overtaken by a storm. The cabin of a small sloop lying in the anchor in the stream, and laden with garden mold, afforded us the only available shelter. We made the best of it, and passed the night on board. I slept in one of the only 2 berths in the vessel, and the berths of a sloop of 60 or 20 tons and the berths of a sloop of 60 or 20 tons need scarcely be described. That which I occupied had no bedding of any kind. Its extreme width was 18 inches. The distance of its bottom from the deck overhead was precisely the same. I found it a matter of exceeding difficulty to squeeze myself in. Nonetheless, I slept soundly, and the whole of my vision, for it was no dream and no nightmare, arose naturally from the circumstances of my position, from my ordinary bias of thought, and from the difficulty, to which I have alluded, of collecting my senses, and especially of regaining my memory, for a long time after waking from slumber. The men who shook me were the crew of the sloop, and some laborers engaged to unload it. From the load itself came the earthly smell. The bandage about my jaws was a silk handkerchief in which I had bound up my head in default of my customary nightcap. The tortures endured, however, were indubitably quite equal for the time, so those of actual sepulture. They were inconceivably hideous, but out of evil proceeded good. For their very excess wrought in my spirit an inevitable revulsion. My soul acquired temper. I went aboard. I took vigorous exercise. I breathed the free air of heaven. I thought upon other subjects than death. I discarded my medical books. Buchan I burned. I read no night thoughts, no Faustian about churchyards, no bugaboo tales. Such as this, in short, I became a new man. I lived a man's life. From that memorable night, I dismissed forever my charnel apprehensions, and from them vanished the cataleptic disorder, of which, perhaps, they had been less the consequence than the cause. There are moments when, even to the sober eye of reason, the world of our sad humanity may assume the semblance of a hell. But the imagination of man is no Carathis to explore with impunity its every cavern. Alas, the grim legion of sepulchral terrors cannot be regarded as altogether fanciful. But, like the demons in whose company Afrasiab made his voyage down the Oxus, they must sleep, or they will devour us. They must be suffered to slumber, or we perish. All right, that's the end of that one. The reason I picked this one to end the month on is because, well, it's a little bit long, but the reason I picked the one to end the month on is because the narrator does kind of overcome the horrors at the end of it. It kind of has a more optimistic conclusion. Like, it sounds like he went through his whole life being afraid of dying and being buried alive, and then he had this moment where he thought he was actually buried alive, and it turned out he was just he was on like a trip with his friends, and they were kind of hunkered down in these kind of tight little boxes. But after that experience, he decided to stop worrying about death and start, exercising and taking care of himself. And then it turned out that his condition just kind of went away. And it was more of like, it's all kind of all in his mind, I guess. It sounds like whatever like mental health crisis he was having, he was able to overcome it. And I thought that was a very sweet kind of way to end the story. And a nice kind of ending to even though the month has been full of horrors, we're ending it with a story that has a kind of a hopeful ending. And he got out of it. He's all right. And even though it seemed like he's being buried alive, his friends were there to save him. So it's more hopeful. I think that's why I decided to end the month with this story. But I really like that one. I really like the build up. A lot of Poe's stories have a lot of build up with these kind of long opening sequences, a lot of long like explanation of stuff before it gets into the horror. This one kind of does that too, but the build up is like other similar stories of being buried alive, and it kind of starts getting you in suspense right away, and then you find out, oh, but he's also had this experience, and he's been thinking about this is like his biggest fear, and he's had it on his mind this whole time, and you wonder like, oh no, what's gonna happen to this guy? But then you find out it was never actually as bad as what he thought, and he's okay, and he's getting better, and I just love that. I just love the way it worked out. It's creepy, but it's got a good ending. I love horror with a good ending. So yeah, kudos to that guy, the narrator of the story. You did it. You overcame your struggles, and you got through it, and now you don't have to worry about your fears anymore. It was nice.